In a well-planned garden, there should be lots of things to see and enjoy in the winter months. For example, the ilex behind me, the conifers with all the different colors and shapes, and even seed heads and flower pods, for example, the hydrangea behind me. But in the winter, there's also things that you can and should be doing in your garden. And today we're going to focus on winter pruning. In particularly, winter pruning is designed to concentrate the growth of plants and keep them more in control in our urban environment. We have an out-of-control wisteria on our roof that is in desperate need of pruning. So we're going to head up there and I'm going to show you a couple tricks on winter pruning wisteria. Let's get up there. Wisteria is another example of a vine that is very vigorous growing and that requires pruning twice in a season. First in the summer months, just to control some of the long tendrils that develop, but then again in the winter. In the midst of winter, taking some of the growth and really restricting it back to a concentrated number of buds. So for example, you can see this long growth here that developed in the summer. We're going to take that and reduce it right back to just a few buds. Taking that and doing that throughout the plant, just to really focus the growth and encourage better flowering from the remaining buds. So you do that with your wisteria, pruning in the winter. The winter is a great time to go through the garden and evaluate and look closely at your trees and shrubs because you can actually see their true framework without the foliage. And this is a great time to identify any potential hazardous crossing of branches or very narrow crotches. Identify them, mark them, and then prune them in the proper season. For example, in this case of the Japanese maple, I've identified branches that are crossing over that within a year or two are really going to give us a problem. So I'm going to identify them now by marking them with this piece of twine, which we will leave all winter long, and then prune this in mid to late spring, which is the proper time to prune these Japanese maples. And this will be our indicator. Just as such, I'd probably trim that down a little bit. Another winter task I recommend is as the ground begins to freeze up, and you should wait till the ground begins to freeze up to mound your roses. Take a generous portion of composted manure or triple mix and mound it around their base. Now, contrary to what a lot of the literature says, roses are often recommended to be pruned in late fall or winter. I personally, based on my experience and based on the winters we've been having with the fluctuations of temperature, I recommend leaving them intact and cutting them back very, very late winter or very early in the spring once we've gotten past through the fluctuations of temperatures. And speaking about cuttings, once the holiday season has passed, you can take your evergreen boughs or your Christmas trees, limb them up and use those evergreen branches to insulate portions of your garden. To help protect your perennials over the winter. I'm a big fan and promoter of winter shapes and forms in the garden, and one of the best groups of plants to do that and to provide that for your winter garden are ornamental grasses. However, not all ornamental grasses are created equally, and some of them withstand our Canadian winters in terms of their form and shape better than others. One group of ornamental grasses that I really love are Molinias. They provide drama in the garden from late summer into fall and even into early part of winter. However, sometimes when Mother Nature drops a snow load, Molinias don't recover and they come crashing to the ground, and unlike Miscanthus, which can often stand back up, Molinias are out for the count. So I recommend in the winter months giving the Molinias a cut down. And I'd like to share with you a trick that I've learned over the years to minimize your workload when cutting down ornamental grasses. It involves a little bit of jute and twine, and wrap up your grasses. Give them a nice wrap in a bundle, tie them up good and tight. And by doing so, once you cut them, you'll actually be able to just remove the whole bundle as opposed to portions flying all around. And when you do go to cut them, it's really important to use a sharp pair of pruning shears and cut as close to the base as possible. Once you've removed the main clump of grasses, I just recommend going over the remainder of the clump and just giving it another cut to even it out, just so all the stems are approximately the same height. And that, by cutting it close to the ground, you allow a maximum amount of light to reach the crown, and that I feel gives better overall growth to the grass. And remember last fall we shared with you some tips about planting bulbs with your ornamental grasses? Here you can see the muscari foliage coming up. So in the spring there's not going to be a lot happening with the ornamental grass, but the muscari, the bulbs around here, will provide a lot of color long before we get some growth from the panicum. With time, Clematis tend to age and they become this massive entanglement of vines. So eventually, I recommend with almost all of the different selections, about every 3 to 5 years, just give them a severe cutback to really help to regenerate their form and shape, which is what I'm starting to do here. It's something that takes a little bit of time, and basically what you want to do is just cut above an outward facing set of buds And that'll be your new growth. That'll help to give you new form and structure. Again, don't necessarily worry about what group it belongs to. In this case here, we're taking this plant that has aged quite a bit and really giving it a good hard cutback to generate brand new growth, which then will be following the proper pruning practices for following years. Now, where was I? Another winter pruning tip I'd like to share with you involves Clematis once again. And this involves the later flowering or smaller flowering species types that flower in late summer. They flower on new wood. So what I like to do is actually go out into the garden in February and give them a good cut. But I don't want to remove this wonderful growth at this time of the year. I love the seed heads, I love how the birds will pick away, and they still provide winter interest. So what I will do is I'll prune the vines to some good strong buds, but I will leave the balance in place. New growth in the spring will start from down here, and in the spring I can simply cut this all away, but yet still enjoy it during the winter months. Knowing when to prune your clematis can be a real challenge, but I want to share with you one of my most important tips that I apply to all clematis, regardless of the flowering group. What I recommend with all newly planted clematis for the first couple of seasons is give them a good hard cutback in the winter months. What you want to do is encourage a lot of growth from the base to get a multi-stemmed plant as opposed to one that has just a few stems. So in winter, go through and cut very close to the base to a couple sets of buds and just leave that to encourage new growth in the spring. Again, all flowering types, because I want a dense plant in the garden, not one with just a few vines on it. What have we learned about the winter garden? We've learned that a well-designed garden has something to appreciate and enjoy all year long. But we've also learned that in the winter garden, there are things that can be done. For example, pruning vigorous vines such as Wisteria. You've done a summer pruning, then do a winter pruning to reduce the overall growth. Do not prune your roses. Use your cuttings from your evergreen browse and from the holiday season to protect your perennials. Evaluate the garden. Look at your trees and shrubs. Look for crossover branches and mark them. Look at the ornamental grasses, those that do not stand up for the winter, such as Millennia. Consider cutting those down. Don't forget to bundle them up. It'll save you a lot of work. And also your clematis, taking that time to give them a cut so that you can get concentrated growth from the bottom. But remember to leave everything in place, especially those seed heads, because they add so much to your winter garden. And finally, what we want in the winter garden is plenty of precipitation and insulation. So let's hope Mother Nature hears our request for ample snowfall. We want a white garden. And look, can you see? Snow's coming.